Good evening and welcome to the final event of the 2021 Melbourne Music Summit. My name is John Nolan and I'm the Director of Learning, Engagement and Innovation at the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands we are on. I am here on Bunwarang country and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Tonight, we're hearing from Graham Abbott for the closing keynote of the Melbourne Music Summit, Why Music, the Power of Beauty. But first, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the Managing Director of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, Sophie Galaise.
Thank you, John. Good evening and welcome to our final event of the week. Unfortunately, our second Melbourne Music Summit is once again happening in times of disruption. We are very grateful to all our presenters and our wonderful team led by John Nolan. They have all shown immense flexibility and a great capacity to adapt, ensuring this event could take place. Many thanks to our partners. This year, the summit is generously supported by the Erica Foundation, 7 News, and the Victorian Government Department of Education through the Strategic Partnerships Program. For us at the MSO, a true silver lining from the pandemic has been the wonderful opportunity to engage with audiences online. Feedback from you after last year's summit and this week shows that our efforts are deeply appreciated and that the professional development delivered by an exceptional group of presenters has had a great impact on you. You have told us that this summit has allowed you to feel reinvigorated in the classroom, to learn more about best practices and teaching strategies, as well as being professionally inspired. Truly, it has been a wonderful week of learning, fun, and information for us all. Our opening keynote session inspired much interaction on the YouTube chat. It was great to see attendees learning from each other's, as well as from our wonderful presenter, Dr. Anita Collins. Tonight, I look forward to hearing from our amazing keynote speaker as we farewell this inspiring week. I hope you will enjoy. And now, over to you, John.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sophie, for that warm welcome. It's now my really very great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Graham Abbott. Graham is a music education graduate of the Sydney Conservatorium, but after 5 years as a school teacher, he embarked upon a new career as a conductor and now has more than 30 years experience conducting orchestral, choral and operatic music of almost every conceivable period and style. Graham was awarded the 2007 Bernard Hines Award by the University of Melbourne in recognition of his services to music in Australia, and he is regarded as one of Australia's preeminent communicators on music, a feature which, when combined with his conducting and teaching expertise, makes him a unique member of Australia's arts and education world. Now, you, our audience, are an essential part of tonight's event, so please add all of your comments, your thoughts, your questions to the live chat on YouTube, and hopefully we'll have a chance to read those out at the end and put some of your questions to Graham. Graham is standing by in his living room, ready to deliver his keynote. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you, John. I'm speaking to you from Dja country here in central Victoria, and I happily and respectfully acknowledge the deep and ancient connection Indigenous Australians have to this land and their culture. It's an honour to have been asked to be a keynote speaker to conclude this amazing event hosted by the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. When I was invited to take part, my initial response was to say no, because as I look back over my professional life, I have in fact spent very little of it actually employed as a teacher in the usual sense of the word. Looking at the others involved in this week's program, I felt rather underqualified to be speaking to music educators, especially music educators currently involved in music education on a regular basis. I decided to accept the invitation to take part when Sylvia Hosking said it would be okay for me to share a few personal thoughts and encouragements with you. Whatever our line of work, and I think this is especially true for teachers, it's very easy for the urgent to swamp the important. Or to put it another way, we can too easily forget the good things about what we do in the rush to complete tasks pressed upon us by others, by circumstances, and sometimes by ourselves. So what follows is rather personal, far from well-researched, and unashamedly warm and fuzzy in places. You have been warned. My tertiary training, as John said, it was at the Sydney Conservatorium. It was in the late 1970s, and it was in music education. I worked as a full-time secondary teacher for 5 years after that in the early 80s. As a student, I also taught violin and viola privately, but I soon found it impossible to keep that sort of private teaching going while I was also teaching school. So I stopped my private teaching during my first year out, as they say in the business of school teaching. Ever since then, my actual teaching work has been limited and occasional, juggled between the demands of a conducting career and, for a later 15-year period, my work in radio. I have nothing but the greatest admiration for those who make a lifelong career of teaching, whether in the classroom or the studio. It's something I don't think I did very well. I was forever writing my class notes after the event or forgetting to make a note of what my students had to practice for their next lesson. I guess I was a bit of a ditherer or unable to focus despite being obsessive about organisation in other contexts. In the larger scheme of things, though, I believe that my teaching skills were, and still are, better used in different areas. I've often said that conducting is very much like teaching. For a start, just like teaching, there's a lot of preparation involved, preparation that very few people ever see and even fewer understand. And at its most basic, the art of conducting is based on taking your performers and your audiences on a journey from the known to the unknown, as a teacher does with students. To do this involves a clear vision and goals, coupled with enormous flexibility and an ability to think on your feet and make snap decisions. So I guess my teacher's soul has been exercised in that way over the years. Of course, my 15 years at the ABC miraculously managed to combine and utilize almost everything I've done before. Teaching, communicating, performing, it was all there. Since leaving the ABC 3.5 years ago, my professional life has been an eclectic mix of conducting, podcasting, speaking, writing, blogging, and tour leading. There's a bit of the teacher in everything I do, but I see myself as a dabbler rather than a professional. And I'm conscious right now that I'm talking to many professionals. In other words, I'm probably suffering from a bit of imposter syndrome. That said, I do consider myself one of the luckiest people alive, lucky for a number of reasons. Firstly, because so much of my work has fallen into my lap. Being on ABC Radio, for example, sprang from one of those chance conversations via email based on a one-off event which couldn't have been foreseen. Secondly, I regard myself as lucky because so much of my brain is being used in what I do. And thirdly, who wouldn't regard themselves as lucky when you're actually being paid to learn and to share your passions? This last point, sharing your passions, is the springboard for something I want to talk to you about here. I'm often asked what my hobbies are. This can usually be translated as being asked what I do when I'm not at work. You know the sense behind the question. Work is something we have to do to earn a living. Hobbies are what we do in our spare time for pleasure. That is, hobbies are the opposite of work. When I'm asked this question, I feel more than faintly embarrassed. I have no hobbies. I mean, I walk my dog sometimes and I like to travel, like we did in the before times. And I keep telling myself I need to get back into swimming like I used to. But I don't think they really count. For me, I think I have this freakish life, and I think many of you will be the same, where my hobby is actually what I get paid to do. Or if you like, I love my work so much that I don't need hobbies. Don't get me wrong, I don't live on some nirvana-like plane where there's never any angst, argument, or anger. But I am truly lucky to be able to say that I love what I do. But this has some strange outcomes. For a start, apart from my home life, I don't have much else in my life which isn't somehow related to music in particular or art in general. And secondly, I have the rare and privileged position of being able to experience firsthand and for lengthy periods the benefits music can provide for us humans. In this age of economic rationalism, we can no longer assume that personal experience of music will be automatically accepted as being an important part of a child's world. Even as music education students in the 70s, we were given pointers on how to argue with an unsympathetic principal for funding to support the school musical or band program. We were made aware of research which showed the benefits of music to a child's cognitive development. We all learned the dogma about children who studied music being better at maths, better at language, better at verbal expression, and better socially adjusted. Fortunately, in recent times, such research has continued to come to light, and I hope presented regularly to those who think that it's okay to talk about elite sports people, but not elite musicians. I'm not anti-sport. I say, let's have more elitism. Let's help every child find what they're elite at and give them the chance to develop their elite skills. Let's have elite sports people and elite musicians, elite linguists and elite economists, elite potters and elite town planners. But I was never very good at being able to trot out the facts and figures. I tend to see things more simply, more essentially. The essence of the good that music can do will, of course, be different for every person, regardless of the common good it can impart. But there is a principle here which I've been thinking about for many years. Occasionally it comes out in my work, but I do try not to preach my own gospel there too much. I have no such reluctance here, though, as I was asked to suggest my own topic. The principle I see as a basis, not the basis, but a basis of the good that music can do for people is to do with beauty. My premise is that the contemplation of beauty must be of benefit to humans. To contemplate beauty, in my opinion, has the potential to make us better people. I have no hard and fast definition of what a better person is, but I certainly don't mean richer or more powerful or more influential. By better, I think I mean more decent, more caring, more cooperative, more humane, more human. And for that reason, I've seen enough to know that any educational system which denigrates, cheapens, or omits music education does children and society a grave disservice. Music education helps children express themselves and allows them to feel emotions. But more importantly, music education teaches children that others think and feel and experience the world differently. It teaches them that others have a right to their feelings. It teaches acceptance, empathy, or at least an understanding of diversity. It teaches them that to make music, you need disciplined learning and cooperation with others. Deliberately fostering an educational system which omits these skills, which music imparts better than anything else without exception, is to stunt a child's ability to function as a cooperative member of society. It seems reasonable to me that someone who spends time contemplating the beauty of music, studying it, playing it, experiencing it, listening to it, allowing it to touch and move them, will be allowing a positive influence into their lives. Not just a temporary buzz or hit, but an actual influence for good in the long term. Time spent in such involvements is time not spent hurting others, contemplating hatred or violence, being blinded by short-term desires at the expense of long-term benefits, and so on. The contemplation of beauty actually affects us very deeply. And as musicians, and especially as teachers, this is a major aspect of what we're doing every day. As a secular humanist, I see this as a simple and universal principle. In physics, we know something will be drawn in to replace something else which is absent to avoid a vacuum. I think most will agree that we live in times where negative influences are all around us. The vast majority of any news report will be full of horror, which, if it were in a movie, would be deemed unsuitable for children. Walk down a street and people will more often than not avoid your gaze rather than offer a smile. Make one mistake as a driver and you risk actual bodily harm at the hands of another driver affected by road rage. The vagaries of nature and humanity's influences upon it are the equivalent for today's children of the constant fear of imminent nuclear war under which people my age grew up. My belief is simply that music is one of the things which can act as an antidote to the negative influences all around us. Of course, there are other beautiful things one could also become immersed in. But as music is precious to all of us, I want to encourage us to think about its potential and the potential for real good, which is inherent in our work as teachers. I also want to remind you of the good you're already doing in this respect by being a music teacher. The pressures under which teachers in whatever context are placed today seem to me to be unprecedented. Even without taking into account the stresses of teaching online because of the COVID-19 pandemic, teachers today are under more stress than I could have imagined when I was in the classroom or teaching privately. The on again, off again, in-person or online swings you've all had to deal with as lockdowns come and go make me want to give every teacher still standing a medal. Because of these demands, just trying to reach deadlines and cover the essentials under less than ideal circumstances and with little notice, I imagine it might be easy to forget the real good that your work does for your students. Hopefully you get reminders, but part of my rationale here is to add my 2 cents worth to those reminders. When you share music with people of any age, you are doing real positive good for them in an age where that good is desperately needed. Some familiar words might be coming to mind at this point, such as those of William Congreve. Music hath charms to soothe a savage breast, to soften rocks or bend a knotted oak. Or Dryden, what passions cannot music raise or quell? But I rather prefer Robert Browning's words. Who hears music feels his solitude peopled at once. I like that. Who hears music feels his solitude peopled at once. It describes very much my own experience of music at a fundamental level. I find it very hard to attend performances as an audience member. This is for 2 reasons. One is I can't turn off the performer in me, so I'm always thinking like a performer, what went wrong, how I do it differently, that sort of thing. The other reason is that it's too crowded. I didn't really understand this until I read Browning's words. When I listen to music, and usually when I perform it too, my solitude is peopled, populated. The experience of music on me is so intensely deep, so intensely personal, that I find it hard to tolerate being in the presence of anyone else when this is happening. You might feel the same sort of thing. You might feel exactly the opposite. This doesn't mean I always like what I'm hearing. Hearing a bad performance can also be deep and intensely personal, but the principle is the same. Contemplating music takes me into a world where I experience things that make me realize that there's more to life than terrorism or climate change or poverty. Contemplating music makes me see life in a more balanced perspective. Yes, there are horrible things in the world, but equally, yes, there is beauty. Contemplating music doesn't make me want to opt out or give up or pretend there's no horror in the world. Contemplating music gives me a glimpse into a positive, empowering universe where there really is beauty and strength and good. As teachers, you're a part of that wonderful process for those in your care. As my dear friend and mentor, Richard Gill, was fond of saying, it's all very well to teach music because of the proven benefits it has on other learning, social development, and the like. But the real reason we teach music is because it is, in and of itself, good. Am I sounding like a New Age hippie? Probably. But there is a basic principle here which seems universal to me. Balance, equal and opposite, yin and yang, light and dark. These metaphors have been appropriated by every sort of philosophy, and mine is no exception. Put simply, if we only focus on what we see on the evening news as being all there is in the world, then we have every reason to despair. If we allow music, oral beauty, to become part of our lives and the lives of those people we're lucky enough to teach, then we become more balanced and better able to deal in whatever ways we have available with the undoubted horror in our world. This last point puts me rather at odds with an advertising campaign on the radio network I once worked for. Some of you might recall TV and print media ads for ABC Classic FM some years ago with lines like, "Ironing is beautiful" with ABC Classic FM, or "Traffic is heavenly" with ABC Classic FM. My personal favourite showed a pile of potatoes while proclaiming, "Peeling is incredible" with ABC Classic FM. The premise is simple: making the boring beautiful. Listen to us and the drudgery of your day will become not only bearable, but desirable. It's only a small step from that to viewing classical music as a drug which can numb us to the realities of the world. But I don't think that was the intent of our marketing department. Or maybe it was. What I think such a marketing campaign does imply is that music is an escape from the harshness of life. But if that's all we view it as, an escape, then the outcome is the same as alcoholism, suicide, or being a hermit in the mountains. To view music as just an escape is a very negative view of its potential, and it is frankly one mostly articulated by people who don't know much about music. Music is an escape, yes, but not just from. It's also an escape to. To say music is just an escape from the negatives of life is to assume the negatives of life are all there is to life, and that we need to get into some vague, empty, nondescript place to be removed from them. Where music takes us to is a positive place of strength and groundedness. Sometimes it makes us calm, other times it makes us excited. Music has the power to help us escape from a black and white world into a coloured one, from a two-dimensional world into a three-dimensional one, from dogma to nuance, from a negative world into a positive one, where we don't deny the existence of horror, but are given the balance and, dare I say it, the strength to deal with it and help make life better for all. Can I also say at this juncture that indulging in music's beauty can be exactly that, indulgent. There's nothing wrong with wallowing in it, immersing yourself in it, letting yourself go in it. Sometimes we're too careful with music, probably because we've been so highly trained to get the details right. There's nothing wrong sometimes with just going for it and listening or playing for sheer, indulgent, glorious, non-fattening, low-carbon emitting pleasure. That's what it's for. For music to truly have its wonderful way with you, you need to indulge, dive in, involve your mind and your senses. Eve Merriam's poem called How to Eat a Poem could apply equally to music. Don't be polite, bite in, pick it up with your fingers and lick the juice that may run down your chin. It is ready and ripe now, whenever you are. You do not need a knife or fork or spoon or plate or napkin or tablecloth, for there is no core or stem or rind or pit or seed or skin to throw away. I think it was one of the famous music educators of the 20th century, Zoltan Kodály, who spoke of the importance of that first experience of being touched, really touched by music. He maintained, quite understandably, that the earlier a child had that experience, the better. It was his version of the famous Jesuit maxim, "Give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man." Doubtless, most of us can recall those special occasions when we've been moved deeply, beyond words, by music. And many of us, I'm sure, can recall the first time we had such an experience, or at least our earliest memory of being totally blown away by music. Let me share with you a treasured memory, not about my own experience of music, but of some children I was teaching. In my first year of music education training, we did a lot of practice teaching in primary schools. And I spent some time working with a kindergarten class. In Victoria, we'd call it prep, at a primary school in suburban Sydney. One day I was asked to take the class for a music listening lesson. The rule of thumb we were taught was 1 minute for each year of a child's age. So as these children were all 5 and 6-year-olds, I was prepared for them not to be able to listen attentively to anything for more than a few minutes at the most. This was in the mid-1970s. I suspect attention spans have shortened since then. I decided to try to fire their imaginations, I think to tie in with some work they were doing with their regular teacher in their language lessons. I simply said I was going to play them some music and that this music told a story. I wanted them to see if they could work out what the story was by listening to the music, and afterwards I'd ask them to tell me their stories. We sat on the floor in a big circle and I put on the record. It was Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre. This piece goes for 10 or 12 minutes, so I fully expected to have to turn it off about halfway through when they became restless. Amazingly, though, they didn't become restless. I was stunned to see them not just sitting quietly, but actually listening and surrendering to the music. One or two of them seemed to be actually in another world. It was for me utterly moving to see this happen for the entire duration of the piece. Then the floodgates opened. Stories of sharks diving into boats and biting people, stories of getting lost in the forest, stories of running in a race, stories of monsters, and everything else in a 5-year-old's imagination came out as they shared what the music had said to them. No child's story was invalid. The personal response to the music was all that mattered. We'd reached the end of the time their teacher had given me for the lesson, but observing the proceedings, she told me to go on. She was as keen as I to see where this might lead. So I had to think quickly. Part of me wanted to let them go and draw pictures of their stories. Another part of me wanted to pick a story and act it out with the whole class. But I took a riskier option. Choosing my words very carefully so as not to invalidate their stories, I told them that the person who wrote the music had his own story too. And I told them what the piece was about. I was concerned that they might find the story of a skeleton playing an out-of-tune violin on a headstone to summon ghosts to a dance, only to have them slink back into their graves when the rooster crowed at dawn, would be a bit dull. But they were intrigued enough for me to try the riskiest bit of all, to play the recording again so they could hear Saint-Saëns' story as well as their own. And they sat there for a second time in silence, some with their eyes closed, seeing that powerful music in their mind's eyes and feeling it very deeply in their beings as they listened to it again in its entirety. It was amazing and one of those rare experiences for a teacher that you can never really plan for. Then they'd had enough and needed to go out and play. That was late in 1976. Those children would be about 50 now. I've often wondered whether any of them remember that experience or whether music became an important part of their lives. What was actually going on inside the minds of those children? What goes on in our minds or the minds of our students when a piece of music touches in that special way? To be honest, I have no idea. I've often been asked to explain why certain music or sounds or composers have certain effects on people. I can understand the question readily enough. It's a reasonable thing to ask. It's the answer I have a problem with. There are, of course, areas of research into these sorts of phenomena which try to quantify this tantalizingly nebulous form of musical experiences. 2 books I've read are very interesting on this. Daniel Levitin's This Is Your Brain on Music and Victoria Williamson's You Are the Music. Why do certain sounds, chords, harmonic progressions, instrumental colors, send a shiver down our spine or make a tingle in the pit of our stomachs? Why do some sounds make us stop in our tracks while others make us want to run a mile? Is there any sort of uniformity of experience among people, or is it as individual as our likes and dislikes of food? And why are some sounds which might be regarded positively in one culture regarded as abhorrent in another? These are huge questions into which people have delved from time to time, but there are no hard and fast answers so far, despite some of the findings being really fascinating. To try to quantify musical responses is incredibly difficult. The science of psychology will tell us that people's responses and reactions to anything are largely born of their past experiences as well as their genetic makeup, which means that there are probably as many different responses and reasons for them as there are people. Musical responses seem to be no different. Why do I find almost every note Handel wrote totally fascinating, while others find the same music mind-numbingly tedious? A lot of this has to do with my own past experiences. My mother bought me recordings when I was a boy, and among the earliest of these were recordings of music by Handel. Handel's music and my reading about him comprise a vital part of my childhood. This, oddly enough, is not a universal experience among Australian children, but it goes at least part of the way to explaining my fascination with the man and his music. This doesn't mean, though, that everything I experienced in my childhood resulted in consuming passions in adulthood. My father tried to interest me in sport. Remembering the 3 soccer matches I endured as an 8-year-old still fills me with terror. This tells me that childhood experiences can also have a negative as well as a positive consequence in later life. So, where does this leave us as music teachers seeking to expose our students to beauty? If the very concept of what is beautiful is as individual as we are, then how can we hope to find the music which will touch and move our students in that special way? And how can we avoid making the experience of learning music a negative one? We all know of people, indeed we may be such people ourselves, who look back on their childhood music lessons with horror. When we consider the greatness that is music, we have an awesome responsibility when we take on the role of teacher. We have a wondrous thing in our grasp, this stuff called music, and the role of passing its wonders on to others is a daunting one. Yet we mustn't become weighed down with that responsibility. Drama is a wondrous thing, so is poetry, so is science and geography and medicine and architecture and engineering and, dare I say it, even sport. Human endeavour is wondrous, and music is a part of that. Those who teach all these disciplines and every other sort of discipline have the same responsibility. But for us as musicians, we need to remember that our love for music has the potential to be both positive and negative in the way our students respond to it. The positive side, which I'm focusing on here, is easy enough to see. We all know of teachers who were special in our lives or the lives of others. Those teachers who not only loved music, but had the knack of sharing that love and helping others feel it too. It's a rare gift, but not one that is impossible to develop in some way. All it takes is stepping back, remembering what inspired us to get involved in music, remembering the spark rather than dwelling on the flame, or worse, the ashes. Classroom and private teaching didn't work for me because I wasn't free, for whatever reason, to keep the spark in the forefront of my mind. I got caught up in the scaffolding and not the building, being unable to separate style from substance. In a sense, I probably wasn't taught to teach very well at all. And it wasn't until long after I stopped working as a full-time teacher that I started to get a real glimpse of what teaching really is. Then again, just as some people say you can't teach people to compose, maybe you can't teach people how to teach. You can teach educational principles upon which to base their teaching, but maybe that knack of being able to teach is as individual as we are as well. It needs to be discovered and developed alone and then mentored by others. In any case, being able to share our love for music is what really understanding the beauty of music is all about. But it's difficult. Firstly, it might be hard for us to accept that a student doesn't see in, say, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata the beauty that we might see in it. And secondly, it can be hard for us to accept that a piece of, say, rock music, which our student might love, could have any beauty in it at all. When I've talked about this issue in the past, I've been asked a fairly obvious question. When I speak of beauty, am I only referring to music that is beautiful, that is pretty or nice or pleasant? What about music which is disturbing or confronting or even ugly? Can that move us deeply as well? It's a fair question. I really don't think I'm just talking about calm or lovely pieces. For example, I think we can view the last movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata as being just as beautiful as the other two, even though it's dark and stormy and at times even bleak. And I think in the sense of encountering aural beauty, the music in question can sometimes be very dark indeed. It's more a meeting, a powerful and moving collision with music that I'm thinking of when I speak of an encounter with beauty. There's often an element of shock involved. Tosca singing Visi d'arte in the second act of Puccini's opera is a beautiful piece of music, even if the circumstances of coercion and impending rape are horrifying and deeply disturbing. Penderecki's Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, Steve Reich's Different Trains, or Michael Smetanin's Black Snow, likewise are dark, troubling pieces, not ones one would immediately think of as beautiful. But the effect they can have on us can be as moving as Beethoven's Seventh or The Merry Widow. This is why a horror movie can still be enjoyable, not because of its subject matter, but because of the emotional ride it facilitates. Think of the visual arts. Picasso's Guernica is hardly beautiful in the traditional sense, nor is its powerful message about human brutality anything but confronting. But this didn't stop me crying when I stood in front of it in Madrid a few years ago. It was a beautiful experience, just not a pretty one. At this point in the proceedings, a group of musicians from the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and I were going to play for you a piece of music which I find incredibly beautiful. Even though we can't do that now, I'm able to share a recording with you. It lasts a little over 3 minutes. I do this in full knowledge of the risks involved in me sharing something I find beautiful, which you may not. It's a short piece by Handel, which touches me more deeply than almost any other piece of music I know, by any composer. Why this should be so is impossible to define, but it has to do with the shape of the melody, and in particular, the way Handel harmonizes it. Those of us raised in the Western tradition seem to get goosebumpy when the melody is harmonized using chord 6, where one might more simply harmonize it with chord 1. That is, the use of an interrupted cadence in the course of a melody. The March of the Priests and Sarastro's Hymn to the Gods from the Magic Flute do this, so do many hymns. It's stock in trade when one wants to sound otherworldly, and it's often abused. Handel does it sublimely in I Know That My Redeemer Liveth in Messiah, and he does it in this piece too. Interestingly, both these Handel examples are in E major, a key he used for some of his most deeply heartfelt and spiritual moments. Mozart used E major similarly too. Look at the slow movement of the K219 violin concerto. The music I've chosen is an instrumental aria with variation, the third movement of the last concerto of Handel's Opus 6. The recording features the Australian Brandenburg Orchestra directed by Paul Dyer, and I'm grateful to the ABC for giving us permission to use the track here. To me, this music isn't only beautiful, it speaks of greater things, in the way a great painting, play, cathedral, or orator might make us think beyond ourselves. That's part of what the contemplation of beauty can do. I don't know why it does that for me, it just does. Anyway, here it is. Your reaction to this music may be totally different to mine. That's fine. What's important is that I share it. Your reaction, if considered, is valid regardless. As in most things in life, extremism is death. To assume there is only one right answer to anything in the arts is to miss the whole point of being human, and especially to miss the whole point of music, I think. Music isn't an exact science, music is art. To reduce music to the level of facts and figures, dates and places, fascinating though we might find them, and I'm speaking to myself here as much as anyone, is to miss its core, its heart. It's possible for us, with the best intentions in the world, to cause music to have the same effect on some of our students as sport had on the 8-year-old me, despite my father's good intentions. In my life over the past decade or so, I seem to keep returning to a simple principle, one which is at the core of Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, but Buddhism is a philosophy which contains some attractive principles. The one which I find relevant here, I think, is that of the middle way. In music, and especially in teaching, there are extremes of love and hate which can be destructive. We need to tread a middle path between the extremes, sharing our love for music, yes, but also hearing what it is our students are saying about what they love. Because our students come from a very different set of experiences to ourselves, it stands to reason that they won't automatically find beautiful what we find beautiful. The role of teacher puts on us a responsibility not only to share beauty, but also to be sensitive to what others find beautiful. That's not so easy, but in my experience, it turns out to be immensely rewarding in the long run. We end up immeasurably richer, having discovered musical worlds we didn't know existed and which at their core share fundamental elements with what we love. This relates to another principle of Buddhism, and one much misunderstood in the modern world, that of mindfulness. Being mindful often means doing things slowly, but there's way more to it than that. Mindfulness is a state of awareness, of consideration, of not being on automatic pilot. It means being considered and thoughtful and aware of our actions and possible consequences. To me, as a teacher, mindfulness is connected with being aware of what others might need in order to understand the concept I'm sharing. And the most important principle here is that there is no single way to teach a concept, fact, or idea. What might work for one student might mystify another. If we'd all met in Melbourne in person as we'd originally intended to, and if I stood in the midst of you and asked you all to draw a picture of me, all of your pictures will be different. Artistic skills aside, they'd all be of me, but they'd all show me from a slightly different angle, some from the front, some from the side, and so on. Similarly, a fact or concept or idea or fingering or phrasing or rhythm or dynamic change can be approached from many different perspectives when they're being taught. One student might understand how a syncopated rhythm works right away. Another might not click with it and will need a different approach. This involves quick thinking on the part of the teacher and being mindful of what the best way to approach the issue might be for the student in question. It requires the teacher to be constantly aware that there is no one way of teaching anything, although experience will teach us what might work best in some situations. To find the way that works for a particular student may involve some quick thinking and trial and error, all the while making sure the learning experience is positive and the student isn't made to feel stupid. This is what some have called the swan technique of teaching, calm on the surface, paddling like hell underneath. So beauty is positive, and the effects it can have on us and our students can be overwhelmingly positive. But the sharing of beauty places upon us as teachers a huge responsibility, a responsibility to share it in the first place, and a responsibility to share it in a way which doesn't ruin it. Teaching is tough. People who know me will know that I have a moral dilemma with music being made competitive, especially for children. I'm not going to go on about it here. I know there are positives which can come from taking part in a competition such as an Eisteddfod, and I know my attitude is in part fed by my own experiences of such things, but there you are. That's just me. My reason for mentioning it here is connected with exams. Music exams are a part of life. I would love there to be no such thing as music exams. I don't think this will ever happen, but I want us to imagine for a moment what life would be like for teachers if there were no exams. Would this be an enormous threat? The real danger is that an exam becomes not one of our goals, but the only goal, and our students potentially end up missing what could be the best bit, which is the life-changing experience of the beauty of music. I don't think for a second I'm saying something new here. You all know this dilemma far better than I. Since I was a school teacher, the pressures on teachers to meet exam requirements, not to mention administration and legal requirements, have increased beyond measure. I only say this to maybe just help us take a step back from the madness we sometimes find ourselves in. I'm not so anarchic as to suggest that exams and the contemplation of beauty are mutually exclusive. It's just that it's much easier to focus on exams with their structure and security and familiarity for us as teachers than to step off into the uncharted waters of the experimental, the existential, and the individual. But surely we need to find a balance. Sadly, the system in which teachers find themselves often works against this. Just a few thoughts on what I mean. You might want to take a moment to play a recording of some other work by the same composer you're focusing on. Or your student might want to play a work with a similar title by another composer. Or you might take a moment to talk with your student about what the composer's life was like at the time she or he wrote the music. Whatever we do in a less structured, more beauty-oriented sort of world, it has to be honest, and it has to come from within. Think about your honest reaction to the music being played by your student or studied in your class and what you would really love them to get out of it. Then share that. It can be life-changing for the teacher as well. The result is priceless. If by these sorts of, I think we call them enrichments, we enable our students to experience the true beauty of music, or better still, to go on and discover it for themselves, then they're involved in something truly miraculous. And yes, I'll go so far as to say that such experiences make them better people and our world a better place. Music really does have that potential. Walk down any crowded street and ask yourself, what difference would a real, honest, and deep exposure to the beauty of music make to some of these people? As the Chinese teacher Confucius is supposed to have said, music produces a kind of pleasure that human nature cannot do without. Anywhere there are people, there is the need for the beauty that music can provide. And music teachers are in the front line of such a service. Treasure that service to your students, and it will change you as much as it will change them. And thank you for all that you as teachers do, simply by doing your job to make the world a better place. Thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts with you. I wish you all the greatest success in your endeavors and in the ways you all make this a better world through the beauty of music.
Graham, thank you so much for that wonderful and reflective presentation. That's such a lovely way to end the Melbourne Music Summit this year. We've had people joining us tonight from across Wurundjeri and Bunurong country in Melbourne, including from Mount Waverley, Noble Park, Doncaster, Rowville, Port Melbourne, Mornington Peninsula, Croydon, Eltham, Fawkner, Frankston, also on Wadawurrung country in Wenduri, and from Gadigal country in Sydney, and from Rotorua in New Zealand. I'm sorry, I've missed some. I didn't quite get all of the places that our audience mentioned in the chat. Just a reminder, this is your last chance to put in questions while I'm reading out your comments. So if you've got a question for Graham, pop it into the chat right now. So we've also had some lovely comments tonight on YouTube. Lynn says, thank you for this much needed injection of inspiration at this trying time, nicely aligned, or maybe in competition, with the Olympics. What a feast. Well done, MSO. Tricia says, this actually, Graham, was when you mentioned Richard said RG was a genius. He could inspire anyone to become a passionate music lover. Thank you, Tricia. That's lovely. Mrs. Ponting said, hi, everyone. What a wonderful week it has been. And Lynn said, love it. Go for it. Indulge. Let it go. Make music real. Thanks, Graham. Now, let me just have a little look. Graham, we've had one question here. Can you identify and express why you love Handel's music so much beyond the childhood associations?
Yeah, that's one I've often asked myself. He's become an obsession ever since I was 8. And there is something, part of it I think has to do with practicalities. My first conducting experiences were conducting choirs. And anyone who conducts choirs has to deal with Messiah. And so I was doing Messiah very early on, and I'm still doing it. In fact, I'm doing it with the Melbourne Symphony at the end of this year. So that's part of it, because I rapidly discovered that there was more to Handel than Messiah, particularly discovering the other oratorios, but looking at the operas and becoming a bit of a missionary for Handel has been a bit of an obsession too. I find it's a bit like I worship Bach, but I love Handel. People often see the two either as opposites or as the same or something. And whereas there's something, if I can compare Bach and Handel, Bach has this sort of vision of heaven, even in his instrumental works. There's something about God in his music. And despite the sacred nature of a lot of Handel's music, I find him very much more down to earth. I find he speaks the common language. So if I want to be raised above humanity, I might listen to Bach. But if I want to have someone who thinks, yes, I know how you're feeling, I'll listen to Handel. That's a very simple way of doing it. But I see the two as being completely complementary to each other. So there's something about Handel's humanity. He also ate and drank too much, and I really identify with that as well.
Oh, fantastic. I have to say, actually, Graham, I've sung in a performance of Messiah conducted by you about 15 years ago, and it dramatically increased my love of that work. Singing.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, John.
We've had some more questions here, which I've just lost. Where is it? Basil wants to say, you've said so many amazing pieces of advice tonight. Speaking of emotions during performances, what would you say to a stressed student or stressful student who doesn't want to perform?
That's so difficult, because obviously, Basil will know that you don't want to push someone into a situation so much that it will turn them off forever. And then you don't want to create a traumatic experience or a memory that will be triggered. It's very difficult because everyone's so individual. I think a lot of it has to do, and I'm just speaking theoretically here, but I think a lot of it has to do with the student getting in touch with the way they express themselves in the music, assuming that they don't deeply hate the music in question and don't actually like playing it. Being able to find their own voice in the notes that are on the page is such an important thing. It's the sort of thing that any performer has to do, but a student may not have understood it yet because they're only starting out. We rightly so teach our students that they have to get the notes right, and they've got to get the rhythms right, and they've got to get the dynamics right, that there seems to be very little of them in it. It's getting them past the point of the notes and into playing the music. And when they start to play the music, they can start to be freer and to be more themselves. Again, this is very hard to say without knowing specifics about the student or the music, but in principle, it's if the student can find themselves or a way to express themselves in the music, that's often a key to a stressed student who doesn't want to perform. Then there are often other things too. I know that people sometimes will start with a small private performance, so a performance for family, or a performance with just a small invited, safe audience. So they get concert practice, if you like, is often a way of building up rather than thinking I've got to perform before the assembly or whatever. It's a tricky one, and it's one that has to be tailored to the individual student. But yet finding themselves so that they're expressing themselves rather than something external is often a bit of a key to this.
Oh, lovely. Anne has written, I hope to sing in Messiah at the end of the year with you, Graham. Anne is in the MSO chorus, I think.
I'm just hoping circumstances allow us to do it, as we're all fingers crossed about everything.
Yeah. Now we did have another lovely question here. This person says, without live music available to kids during lockdown, so live music, the sort of experience of being in the room kind of thing, how would you introduce someone new to our world of music during the era of COVID-19? And this person has a 4-year-old.
Wonderful that's a question to introduce a young child to music like that. Do you know, I think one of the best resources we have is YouTube and the internet. The way that we're spoiled for choice, that's part of the problem these days. You know, when I was a student, to think back to, you know, if I could just get to my desk and suddenly see the Met Opera or the Melbourne Symphony or the Paris Conservatoire or whatever in my room, would have been like dying and going to heaven. So there are so many things online that particularly provide a visual aspect, which I think particularly for a 4-year-old is very important, that it's not just sit down and listen to this music, but it's also, look, here's someone actually playing the music, and there's so many good children's music resources online too. I think that would be the step too. And the secret is make it small, like short, and not too long. And to actually start with small pieces and music with stories. Like I was telling about those children I was teaching, music with stories is always a very important thing. Even if there isn't a story, get them to make one up. I remember one of my nephews once, as a young child, he was introduced to the 1812 Overture by his father. And he was basically got the story about, oh, here's the army coming and here's the cannons and all that. But then there are those quiet bits in the 1812 story, which are not 1812 Overture, which are not quite, you know, programmatic. And he said, oh, this is where they must be stopping and having a cup of tea. He actually made up his own stories for the music when there was no story. And so I think we just allow kids to put on a Mozart sonata and see if they come up with a story. I don't know. But it's the visual aspect and stories, I think, that really are wonderful, particularly for young kids.
Absolutely, and I will take that opportunity to plug some MSO content.
on the
MSO YouTube channel, there's lots of our jams for juniors, which are specifically targeted for 0 to 5-year-olds, and also a couple of sort of episodes of Classic Kids, which are more for the 5 to 10-year-old, 12-year-old even age group. And I think they sort of contain a lot of what you just talked about, Graham. So check that out. Look, I've just got one more comment that I'll read out and then hand back to you, Graham, for any final thoughts. I've just lost the comment now. Anne said, as a retired classroom music teacher, it was great to hear your thoughts, Graham, and to realise once again the importance of music in a child's life. Music education is more important than ever. So I think that's all we've got in the way of questions, and there's lots of lovely comments, which I won't read out all of them. But do you have any final thoughts to leave us with, Graham?
Well, you know, I've been working with the Melbourne Symphony since the early 90s, and in many capacities, not just as a conductor, but also in doing the sort of thing that you're doing, John, for a short period, and doing many other things. I'm not just saying this because this is an MSO event, but the MSO's commitment to music education is extraordinary and incredibly broad, so much broader now than it was when I was doing education management work. And all of the Australian orchestras have this sort of commitment, and they all have online content and things. But I'm so grateful to the MSO for targeting this week at teachers who are often forgotten, I think. You know, we think about how can we gear things to our students' needs and how can we encourage new understanding of music. But the needs of teachers today, more than ever, beyond my understanding and beyond my comprehension. And just to have a resource like this to just, if nothing else, do what I've tried to do this evening, which is to just say, hang in there because you're doing fantastic stuff for our kids, is really good. So I'm very grateful to the MSO for mounting this week. And also to know that there are thousands and thousands of teachers out there committed to sharing the beauty of music with people of all ages, particularly children, but also of all ages, is so encouraging to me. And it's just been a wonderful experience to get a glimpse of it here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for those lovely complimentary words about our work at MSO. We hope that for all of you watching this week has, as Graham says, been inspiring and offered you some kind of support in all that amazing work you do. So that's the end of the Melbourne Music Summit. A big thanks to our Melbourne Music Summit supporters, the Erica Foundation and the Victorian Government Department of Education through the Strategic Partnerships Program, and to our partner 7 News. I have to say a very heartfelt thank you and congratulations to the wonderful team at MSO who have worked extremely hard to put the Melbourne Music Summit together this year and to keep it on the road despite lockdowns, especially to the wonderful Sylvia Hosking. Finally, thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening and across the week. We really hope you found tonight's presentation and the whole week of events to be useful and inspiring. And we look forward to seeing you next year when the Melbourne Music Summit returns from the 18th to the 22nd of July. Mark it in your diaries. You heard it here first. Stay safe and have a good night. Thank you.